Hello, BookTube. It's Sunday. It's just before 6:30 in the morning. And we're just coming to see what the river is up to. And give you my specialty, landscape therapy. Now, you know, when I came down here, wasn't sure what I would use this video for, but now I have a very clear idea. As I come down here to the river, I think this little piece of film would be ideal to talk about Kenneth Graham's Wind in the Willows, which I'm currently reading. So, when you see this, I guess the decision will have been made. But, you know, before we get there, let's just let the birds do the talking. Hello, BookTube. I have some good news. If you watched my coffee break videos, the ones with the meditations on books that we do not finish, you'll remember that I committed myself to read. It was a very short list of books, but they were very, literarily established titles that I failed to read no matter how many times I tried. And I had committed myself to try to read these in 2023. Now, I'm pleased to report that I have at last finished Kenneth Graham's The Wind in the Willows. Yes, The Wind in the Willows. Now, I could have put together a review, but I mean, that to me, that just seemed ridiculous. The book in question, there have been 99 reprints since it was first published, and I think at least 6 different film adaptations. A review just seemed pointless. What needs to be said about the book has been said elsewhere in quantity. What mattered more, I felt, was to ask myself, as I was reading, what was it about this book that put me off so much all those years ago when I was trying to read it, and then compare or contrast that with my reading experience now. By the way, The Wind in the Willows was published in 1908, so it is in the public domain. You don't need to spend money on it unless you want a particular copy. So that's what I did. I went onto Project Gutenberg and downloaded the text onto my Kindle, and I will leave a URL to the link in the description box below. Okay, so I want to look at some reasons why, possibly, I wasn't able to get as excited about The Wind in the Willows when I tried to read it all those years ago. I've got 3, and the first one, surprisingly, is the English landscape. It was clear to me as I was reading the book now that Kenneth Graham knew and loved the English landscape. If I read a quote from chapter 3, you will see how he uses the narrator's voice to talk about the spring plants and in what order you see them flowering along the riverbank. The pageant of the riverbank had marched steadily along, unfolding itself in scene pictures that succeeded each other in stately procession. Purple loosestrife arrived early, shaking luxuriant, tangled locks along the edge of the mirror whence its own face laughed back at it. Willow herb, tender and wistful like a pink sunset cloud, was not slow to follow. Comfrey, the purple hand in hand with the white, crept forth to take its place in the line, and at last, one morning, the diffident and delaying dog rose stepped delicately on the stage, and one knew, as if string music had announced it in stately chords that strayed into a gavotte, that June, at last, was here. One member of the company was still awaited, the shepherd boy for the nymphs to woo, the knight for whom the ladies waited at the window, the prince that was to kiss the sleeping summer back to life and love. But when Meadow Sweet, debonair and odorous in amber jerkin, moved graciously to his place in the group, then the play was ready to begin. Now, I did not live in England when I first attempted to read The Wind in the Willows. I lived in Western Canada. The natural landscape is wild. It's not as wild as other parts of Canada. It's not as wild as other parts of the world, but it was very different. Having lived in England now for several decades, I can see the difference in the landscape. England no longer has large carnivores like wolves or bears, no longer has wild boar, and I don't think it has many or any poisonous snakes. Kenneth Grahame, I think, captures what the English countryside feels like to me, which is much tamer, semi-domesticated, a place where settlements and comforts are rarely very far away. So from a purely Canadian perspective, it was difficult, I think, to identify or warm to these gentle, well-mannered animals who ate picnic lunches and punted on the river. Just the idea of punting. The closest river I knew as a child was the Fraser, and you perhaps can punt along parts of it, but definitely not in the rapids that run through the Rocky Mountains. And that leads nicely into the second reason why I may not have enjoyed The Wind in the Willows when I tried to read it the first time, and that is the level of jeopardy. In keeping with that gentle landscape, when you think of the sort of adventures on which Ratty and Mole embark, well, they are also very gentle. I mean, you could say no animals were harmed in the writing of this novel. Hey, I would bet that I started to read The Wind in the Willows with great expectations. Do you see how I just dropped a literary allusion there? Maybe I hoped for a fantasy spectacle of some kind, some enormous battle, or a long journey with many, many hardships, or a dramatic rescue of some kind. But even if we think about the high points in the actual book, Toad's escape from prison, or the retaking of Toad Hall, none of the characters the reader is meant to like is ever in very much trouble for very long. And the third reason why I may have been unimpressed with The Wind in the Willows is that distinctly parental narrative voice. Think of all those references to animal etiquette, where the rules are all about, what you're not supposed to talk about in company. And then there's Toad. The character of Toad is clearly created to be a bad example of conceit and impulsiveness and many, many other flaws. He's so bad that when he finally does reform on the closing pages of the book, I mean, you can't honestly say that that change of heart is believable, given how many times he's failed to change already. I'm going to read you an example of this parental voice from chapter 6. Quote, "They set off up the road on their mission of mercy, Badger leading the way. Animals, when in company, walk in a proper and sensible manner, in single file, instead of sprawling all across the road and being of no use or support to each other in case of sudden trouble or danger." Okay, look, having said all that, I wouldn't want anybody to think that I still have a downer on Kenneth Grahame's book. I am good with it. I only wish, if I have a regret, it's that I wish I didn't have to read The Wind in the Willows for myself. It seems to me that this book should be read to a child by an adult. They do not have to be a child living in England, but a child living in England would have the slight advantage that they would recognize the landscapes in the book, and that it would mean that they would learn about their own natural surroundings as a result. But I think this book is best experienced very young, when the imagination is just that much stronger, and an adult reader who can love the language would really bring that text alive. Let me talk about what I loved about The Wind in the Willows. I loved the sensuality. Grahame is a really skilled descriptive wordsmith. He captures sensory experiences like the feeling of coming in from a winter's walk into a warm house, or the visual experience of rowing along a river under moonlight. And all the descriptions of food. Right from the first chapter, when Ratty describes the contents of his wicker basket. I mean, just the fact that he has a wicker luncheon basket, right? Let me read. "There's cold chicken inside it," replied the rat briefly. "Cold tongue, cold ham, cold beef, pickled gherkin salad, French rolls, cress sandwiches, potted meat, ginger beer, lemonade, soda water." And there's descriptions of food that was more everyday back in the early 20th century than now. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers, fried ham, tinned sardines, onion sauce for eating rabbit, right? Or rabbit. Guava jelly. Oh, macaroni pudding. Those are going to sound really exotic and weird and probably hilarious for small children. And then there are the sound effects, right? This is the sound, mole digging his way out of his burrow. So he scraped and scratched and scrabbled and scrooged, and then he scrooged again and scrabbled and scratched and scraped. It's just beautiful. Or otter returning to the river with a swirl of water and a kloop. It's perfect onomatopoeia. And then there's Toad's obsession with the poop poop sound of his motor car. I assume that's the horn being used. I've never heard a vintage car engine that made a poop poop noise. And sometimes I wonder if Kenneth Grahame invented that sound purely because he knew children would just love to repeat it. Oh, that was really enjoyable. And now I should sum up. Kenneth Grahame wrote this story to entertain his own sons, and most of the pleasure that I got from reading The Wind in the Willows as an adult was because I could imagine how much a small child would want to hear stories set in this beautiful landscape where they could, just like Ratty and Mole, spend the day exploring and having little adventures, but always coming safely back home. I could understand why some adults might reread this book as, we call it comfort reading. It makes great comfort reading. So please click the like button if you've enjoyed this video. Before I sign off though, I should let you know what is coming up on this channel. I'm currently reading an English translation of the Greek novel 3 Summers by Margarita Liberakis. And so that will be the next fiction review. I'm also planning a new set of Sideline videos. Now this will be a series where I choose 4 public domain short stories and I read them aloud, and then I follow up with, I'd say, 10 to 15 minutes of analysis and discussion. The first story scheduled will be Monday or Tuesday by Virginia Woolf. That's not when I'm going to put the video on YouTube. The title of the story is Monday or Tuesday by Virginia Woolf. So please click subscribe if you would like to know when that content is coming up. And thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing everybody again soon. Bye-bye.